Hi, everyone. Welcome to the last event of the 2021 Library Live season. My name is Kunga Wangmo Upshaw, and I'm the acting director of the Newport Beach Public Library Foundation in Orange County, California. Thank you for inviting us into your homes this evening. I would like to welcome our loyal members and new guests from near and far to the Library Foundation's virtual auditorium. The 2021 season of Library Live is made possible by all the sponsors you saw in a slideshow, plus all our ticket holders, dedicated foundation members, the Library Live committee, Greg and Sally Palmer, Natasha and Todd Palmer, Karen and Bruce Clark, and Sammy and Tammy Tang. Thank you all for going above and beyond to make our programs possible and to help us fulfill the Foundation's mission of providing funds to purchase valuable analog and digital resources for the library. You make our library card a powerful tool for everyone who wields it. To find out more about the Foundation and how to support the Newport Beach Public Library, please visit our new website, nbplf.foundation. What you need to know about tonight's program is that we're recording it, and if you would like to ask a question, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Now, I'm excited to introduce our speaker for tonight, Stephen Rowley. Stephen is a best-selling author and has worked as a newspaper columnist and a screenwriter. His first two books, Lily and Octopus, and The Editor, received numerous accolades. These include a Washington Post Most Notable Books of 2016, Best Books of 2019 by NPR and Esquire magazine. By the way, I hear that both of those titles may be making their way onto the big screen. Stewart is also coming out with a new novel titled The Gunkle, which is due to be published on May 25th. So please go and buy those books at the end of this month. Stephen will be in conversation with author Bianca Murray, who so generously stepped in last minute to be part of this event. She has written two books, Hum If You Don't Know the Words and If You Want to Make God Laugh. Bianca also teaches creative writing and runs the Eunice and Go-Go Doe Own Voices initiative to encourage and empower women of color to tell their own stories. So please welcome Stephen and Bianca.
Hi,
Hello.
everyone. Hi. I would like to begin with a quick video and introduction for our fabulous guest who actually needs no introduction, but here we go. Hopefully the tech will all work. Here we go. There
Wow, play it again, play it again.
You can't say I don't do good introductions, Stephen, right?
Oh my goodness, you're hired for that. I'm never going anywhere without you again.
Well, to all of our guests who joined us here this evening, thank you so much for taking time out. Stephen is one of my most favorite people in the whole world, one of my favorite authors, and I've never even met him. So it's an honor for me to get to interview him here this evening. And happy 50th birthday, Stephen. That was just a few days ago, right?
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a week, a whole week.
There we
And so
go.
far, despite all the trepidation and anticipation, it's just a number. So life has been treating me pretty well. I've got no complaints.
Yeah, I showed the video to a few other people first, and they were like, there's no way he's 50. I was like, I know, right? It's not fair. Okay, so let's dive into the bookish stuff. So for those of you who haven't yet, we're going to be discussing the editor, and then we're going to be discussing the Guncle, which will be coming out very, very soon. Stephen, could you just tell everyone out there, for those who haven't read the editor, could you just tell us a bit about what it's about?
Yeah, and for others, this may be a refresher course, because I know I was supposed to be with you a year ago, I think closing out the season last year, just when COVID was hitting, and unfortunately things were shutting down faster than we could count, and we didn't know what the next year would bring. But I'm so thrilled to be here. I'm sorry it can't be in person quite yet, but I'm glad that we've found this way to be together. And so for anyone who has read the editor, it's now out in this paperback with a brand new cover, which of Jackie, which is very cute. But as a refresher, the editor is about James Smale, a young writer living in New York in the early 1990s, who gets his big break when he sells his candidly autobiographical sort of Ramona Clef novel to a publisher, and finds out his editor is going to be none other than Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, who did indeed have a 15-year career as a book editor in New York, starting in 1978 at Viking Press, and then she moved over to Doubleday a few years later, where she spent the bulk of her career. And I was attracted to this idea because she's so famous for these two marriages, first to JFK and then to Aristotle Onassis, and she sublimated so much of her own personhood to these two marriages, and her own ambitions and her own career desires to raise a family and to be a wife to these two very powerful men, that when she was finally able to step out of the shadow and start her own work life, she really sort of put her head down, focused on this work. A lot of people thought she would be a vanity hire, in that the publisher who hired her wanted really access to her Rolodex, or thought maybe perhaps this was a way to get her the inside scoop on her autobiography, if she ever wrote one. She never did. But in fact, she stunned all of her coworkers by really getting down to work and doing the hard work of line editing and everything. She was very fascinated to do the sort of day-to-day, detail-oriented work of editing that no one really thought she would do. And so it was a really remarkable career. And I'm sorry that it's not one of the top 5 things we even think about when we remember her. She's been gone over 25 years now. She would have just turned, I believe, 90 last year. So it's not impossible to think that she could still be with us. She was taken so young. But so young James Smale is sort of caught between his editor, Jacqueline Onassis, on one hand, and then his manuscript is about his own mother. And so he has his own sort of reconciling his own sort of image of his flawed mother with the idea of sort of the idealized version of America's mother in Jackie Kennedy, and trying to reconcile these two very powerful women and influences on his life.
Yeah, and you've said in interviews that the editor was inspired by you having written a deeply personal autobiographical novel. So you wrote Lily and the Octopus, which was deeply personal. Like you say, it was autobiographical. It was your debut novel. You thought you were going to have to self-publish this novel. So you were in no way expecting the huge splash that book made. And then you also said, you know, in interviews that you changed a ton of names in the book, but some identities are difficult to disguise. Like mom is mom. You know, you can't disguise.
Somehow readers cracked that code. I don't know how they did it, but they did.
Yeah. You could like make her blonde when she's brunette or whatever, but mom is mom. And you said, you know, your own mom wasn't too thrilled with the way she came across or the way she was portrayed in Lily, even though you thought it was quite beautiful. And you said that the two of you came to an understanding, which was lucky, and she's one of your biggest fans.
Yes.
But I'm fascinated as to how that then inspired the editor. Could you like take us through that as well?
Yeah, so there were a few tense moments. So sometimes on the, you know, back in the before times when I was allowed to do events in bookstores and visit libraries in person, you know, people would come up to me and ask me, you know, what was it really like to work with Jackie Onassis? And I have to say, no, that one's the novel. And Lily and the Octopus, while also a novel, is deeply autobiographical. That was sort of based on a difficult time in my own life, and yeah, so it's surprising when you write sort of autobiographically, even when you're turning it into fiction, you change the names and you change characteristics, and some people. I'm always surprised by the response. Some people are annoyed that they're not in the book. Some people don't recognize themselves in the book, like, oh, that character was a real ass. Who's that based on? You know, and I want to be like, oh. And then, you know, there are things that I thought, you know, I didn't say anything that I thought was betraying of a confidence or a character, you know, a character assassination or anything that was not true. I wrote about flaws sometimes, but I think that's really beautiful sometimes. You know, it's what connects us as humans sometimes, our imperfections. And so I was really lucky that I came through that experience unscathed. As you said, I was expecting it to be very small, that if you know, it is a book that has a dog and an octopus in it, despite the personal nature of things. I didn't think, you know, if you want to hear absolute crickets on the other end of a telephone line, call New York publishing agents and ask if they want to read your manuscript about a dog and an octopus. Bianca hosts a really fantastic podcast that I just want to shout out, because if there are any aspiring writers tuning in now, you have a podcast called well, because this is a library talk, I'll say the crap people don't tell you about writing. No, what is it? What's the exact title? No one.
It's the shit no one tells you about.
Yeah. That no one tells you about writing. Yeah. But you have this wonderful segment with literary agents up front, with two literary agents, and you go through people's queries and their sample chapters, and you work on their pitch with them and offer some helpful feedback. Well, I have to laugh thinking like, oh, you know, I was pitching Lily and the Octopus early on as it's a sort of a cross between Joan Didion's Year of Magical Thinking and Moby Dick. And now I sort of want to go back in time and submit that query letter to your podcast just to see the horror on your poor co-hosts' faces.
Yeah.
So, you know, I really didn't expect that book to go anywhere, and I sort of wrote it for myself to heal after a difficult year. So I was really taken by surprise when not only did I find a publisher for it, it was Simon & Schuster, one of the major publishers, and suddenly this book, which I thought next to no one would read, if anyone, was suddenly the big summer release, and it became a bestseller. It was translated in 20 languages, and now, as Kunga indicated, there's a film in the works, and so all these deeply personal things that I had written were suddenly widely available for anyone who wanted to plunk down the cover price of the book. So that's what really inspired me when thinking of a follow-up, because sophomore novels can be tough. There's the sort of dreaded curse of the sophomore novel. I knew what resonated with Lily was writing something deeply personal, and so I kind of wanted to write about what I had gone through with Lily, but find a way. And this time, find, with all due respect to Mrs. Onassis, find the sort of octopus element to this that sort of makes it magical, and then tell that story, this time not as deeply personal, but certainly inspired by what I had been through.
And you had at some point written a screenplay, wasn't it? Or a play about Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis that you then scrapped, and this allowed you to kind of join two ideas together. Is that right?
Yeah, the segment of the book that takes place on Martha's Vineyard, I had long had this fascination, and it did actually come from watching a Project Runway episode where there was a Jackie Onassis challenge. There was a Jackie O challenge, and so different designers picked different moments in her life. So wearing the suits, the Chanel-like suits that she wore as First Lady, or then like lounging in a gauzy dress on a yacht in Greece. And then there was one photo of her just, in jeans and a jacket walking down the street, reading a book in Manhattan, her nose buried in that. And I thought, who is that woman? Because that is someone that I, would like to know. That is someone I do know. It's someone I recognize in myself. And so that's what sort of, I vaguely had a memory that she had worked in publishing, but it really had got me fascinated on that. And I did start writing it as a play, and I couldn't quite figure it out. But when this other piece happened to me about having published a novel, I thought, now I've got the rest of the story to sort of fill in.
Right, because James's book becomes big news because of who his editor is. Like if anyone else had bought the book, it wouldn't have been such a big thing. But to be edited by Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, and that makes the bigger splash than anything he would have, expected as well, which tied in so much to your own experience.
Exactly. And in fact, James's novel, right at the start, James's novel, the novel within the novel, if you will, is called The Quarantine. Which I had a reader point that out to me because I didn't make the connection early on in COVID. But I had sort of written a book called The Quarantine. So people have asked me now, are you going to write that novel? Are you going to write James's novel? And now I'm ready to leave quarantining behind.
I love though, I mean, it's called a novel within a novel, but it wasn't really, because we didn't see much of that novel. And that's a good thing, because, you want that novel within the novel has to be good enough to attract Jackie's attention, but it can't be so good that it detracts from what you're trying to do on your own page. So that's a tricky thing to balance,
Yeah, my own ego would not allow James, the character, to be a better writer than me.
Hilarious, because it's your own writing anyway. But what I loved is in the beginning of the novel there was this bit where people stayed away from Jackie at the publisher in the hallways because they just didn't know how to interact with her. They just didn't know how to be with her. And then there's this amazing scene where the lunch lady is like, Jackie, what do you want? And this like breaks the ice and everyone's relaxed. And is this something you made up, or is this something that you unearthed in all of the huge amounts of research you did for this book?
Yeah, I did an incredible amount of research, because what a responsibility. People have often asked me, do you have the right to to do this, to put Mrs. Onassis in a novel? And I always have to ascertain if they're asking me a legal question. Do I have the right to include her as a character? And certainly she's the very definition of a public figure. And there have been, there's endless back to Shakespeare, and even further back, real life historical figures worked into fiction. That is a tradition as old as time. But then sometimes it's a moral question, and that's a harder one to answer, because it's up to each writer sort of individually. And I knew if I were going to do this, I had to take it seriously, that I needed to make the Jacqueline Onassis in my book as close to who she would have been as I could possibly make her. Now there's, I can do all the research in the world, and I had a very supportive publisher who put me in touch with some of her former co-workers, and I got to talk to a writer who worked with her. There's a wonderful book called Reading Jackie by William Kuhn, which is all about her career in publishing. But I can do all of this. There's still going to be a percentage of this that's, and hopefully a small percentage, but that's my interpretation of her. But that lunch lady story is absolutely true. I mean, if you imagine it, You know, imagine like suddenly you're in an office job and your new coworker is introduced to you, and it's the most famous woman in the world, kind of like you know, if she walked into the break room to pour herself coffee, would you make small talk? You know, how was your weekend, Mrs. Onassis? Or would you kind of clam up and run out of the room, you know? Or there's wonderful stories of her, you know, kicking off her shoes and when she's on a deadline and running up and down the halls and trying to clear a paper jam out of the, Jackie elbow deep in a photocopier, you know, and these images that are so lovely, because I think all the sort of oppressive things that, you know, those of us who have worked in offices find can be kind of drudgery day after day after day. I think these are the things that really allowed her to flourish and really kind of set her free. And so while it may seem strange to imagine her in these settings, that she really loved that. But there was one lunch lady who was not intimidated by her at all, and it will be, what'll it be, Jackie? And that sort of broke the ice with a lot of her coworkers. Well, I guess she's just another one of us. Yeah.
Yeah, because you're like, well, you know, you telling people around the cooler, well, we had a barbecue this weekend, and you don't want to ask her what she did because she was lounging on a yacht somewhere probably, and it just, yeah. But thank God for irreverent lunch women who really don't care about being intimidated, who don't have the time for that.
Right.
So for everybody, please keep in mind we do have the Q&A function. So please start thinking about questions that you would like to ask Stephen.
Yeah, we don't bite, and we'd love to talk about what you want to talk about too. So.
Yeah, I'm going to be asking questions up until a certain point, after which we're opening it to your questions. So type them in there, and hopefully we can get to those later as well. Right, so in the book as well, there's a beautiful passage where James and Daniel are watching the Clinton inauguration. And James thinks about how an administration is judged by whether or not it fulfills the promise of its start, and that a book should be judged in a similar way. Now, in terms of that, like, what would you like your readers to take away from this book?
Oh, goodness. Yeah, that is a really lovely scene. And it's so funny to me thinking back now that, I've been into stores that have sort of classified this as historical fiction, which always makes me laugh because it takes place in the early 1990s. But, and I was like, well, no one's wearing petticoats exactly. And riding horseback. But, it is when you consider like how much the world has changed. It really is a very specific moment in time. And it is, I don't want to, I was going to say, regardless of your politics or whatnot, because I don't really want to get into that. But there was certainly, with the Kennedys, a grace, a more, a gentleness that we certainly don't have today. And some of that's good and some of that's bad. Like they were good friends with Ben Bradley, who went on to, be with the Washington Post and stuff like that. And it's weird to think of a president being so close to the media and some of the things that probably weren't covered that nowadays would be kind of shocking. I don't know if I want that. So not every change is for the worse. However, it was a very interesting moment to have this story unfold against the backdrop of the Clintons coming into office when they themselves were kind of a throwback to Camelot, as they were in their sort of both Clinton and Gore were in their mid 40s as JFK was. There's always so much promise at the beginning of an administration, and certainly, our most recent change here, felt like a turning of the page. Books similarly, we've all read books that have a great premise or great jacket copy and then fall flat a little bit. I would like to think that even where I don't succeed, that people will appreciate that I've tried. I think you can always tell when a book has been reverse engineered to try to repeat the success of someone else's book before it. And I whatever the criticisms are against me or my shortcomings are as a writer, I would like to think that people think that I tried to do something original. And and maybe that's to the detriment of my career, because I have one book about a dog and an octopus, a book about Jacqueline Onassis, and then a book about this sort of new anti-mame that I've written. So I'm sure there are people guiding my career who would like me to be a little more consistent in what I write about, but it has to maintain my interest, and I hope that it feels original.
Yeah, but just in terms of that, so you've said about the editor, you said you wanted to explore universal themes about the minefields of speaking truth to and about those we love. And you said, hopefully it shines a light on the stories we tell the world about our families, about our lives, and the funny, often perverse, sometimes wrenching truths that we unwittingly expose. And this is the commonality in your work, Stephen. Like it on the surface, it seems like your work's also different. It's a dog, it's, Jacqueline Kennedy, it's a gay uncle, but at the heart of it, you are mining your own life. You are mining your own emotional truth, and you are doing the heavy lifting in that regard in all of your novels. And that comes through, that sincerity and that rawness comes through in all of your books. And I think
thank you.
I think that's what your readers connect with,
Good. Yeah, I should be asking you these questions because you can answer them on my behalf better. You're more eloquent than I am. But that's true. I mean, you certainly don't need to be a professional writer or have published a book about your family in a way. We all tell each other stories. We all have, families have stories that get repeated and embellished, and at Thanksgiving dinners and down through the generations, and we are always constantly trying to edit our presentation to the world, what we want to show of ourselves, and so there's a lot of exploring of that, I think, hopefully in the editor as well. Like in the editor, it's very literal. He's written a book about his family, but we're always telling stories to each other to either reveal bits of ourselves, rewrite bits of ourselves, or reach out for understanding.
Yeah, and the emotional honesty is the chord that gets struck throughout all of your work, which is why it resonates so much with me. I read it and it rings a bell inside of me that I just absolutely love. You've said, and this is another commonality in all of your work, you've said you always look for humor, even in life's darker moments. And you've said that you think of yourself as a comedic writer, even though you're known for tearjerkers and emotional stories. So let's talk a bit about how laughter is the same kind of release as tears for you.
Yeah, I'm always surprised, particularly with Lily and the Octopus. It's a book about there's a dog character. We all know what happens to dogs in literature. I'm certainly not the first one to write about the end of a dog's life, but I know that certain people are afraid of that book because they know, they're worried it'll make them cry. And I always, that's always such a strange thing. Like, I'm always reaching for things that will make me cry. Like, that crying is a release. I love that. It's in that way, it's the same as laughter to me. It is like, if a piece of art evokes an emotional reaction that moves you to laughter or moves you to tears, I always think that's a good thing and not something to shy away from. But I also promise people, that I'm not going to lead you to the edge and then push you off. I promise it's worth going to on this journey, and and the same with the editor, not to give anything away, but I hope that I find a balance in these sort of endings that make that journey worthwhile. I would love people to feel like when they finish one of my stories, they want to race back to the beginning again and experience it all over again. But comedy and tragedy are two sides of the same coin. That's also a very tried and true trope. So how's that for alliteration? And off the cuff, people. And I've gotten through some of the darker moments in my life because I have not been afraid to laugh during them. You know, The Guncle, which we'll talk about in a moment, is a book about grief, but it's also the outright funniest book I think that I've written to date. So I think humor is a very important weapon that that we have, and that we can infuse characters with to either allow them to control what they're releasing about themselves and when. And I'm always pro humor in any situation, because one, I think it's fun to read, but it's challenging. And as a novelist, we've had this conversation too. It's like, you know, I'll write a joke, I'll be like, you know, at the computer, haha, and then think like, oh, that's great. And then because of the lag time in publishing, it could be, you know, it takes me a year to finish a book after that, and then another year before, you know, it could be 3 years before anybody reads it and laughs. And I was like, God, that's got to be the longest lag time for anyone. You know, like there are stand-up comedians who don't even want to wait from the set. It takes sound to go from the microphone to the audience, you know, yeah. Let alone wait 3 years. I was like, try waiting 3 years. You think that's tough?
And also, like, people's sense of humor changes, the climate changes in terms of, you know, a joke that was funny 10 years ago. Today, if that joke's told, some of us
someone
would
in
wince.
Hot water, yeah.
Yeah, we'd cringe, we'd wince. It wouldn't be, you know, something that we would find funny. So, I mean, it's hard enough writing comedy. I think writing comedy is incredibly tough. Something that you managed to do is you have these tearjerker, sucker punch moments where, I mean, the reason I know Stephen is because I had a dachshund who passed away just before I read Lily and the Octopus. And I made the mistake of reading that book on a flight, a 15-and-a-half-hour flight from New York to Johannesburg. And I was ugly crying on the plane, to the point that this, you know, one of the stewards brought me an extra thing of wine.
You're welcome.
There we go. You see, you got me extra wine. But here's the thing, like, 1 minute I was killing myself laughing, and the next it was the tears. And I feel like there's a reason why we laugh until we cry, because like you say, it's the same thing. It's that release, you know, and that comes through in all of your work. And we'll talk about the jokes in the Guncle shortly. Something that last question before we move on to the Guncle, something that I would, that you've said in interviews is that you bristle a bit when people say they don't see your books as gay books per se. They kind of see them as more universal or whatever. But as I was saying earlier, everything you write speaks to your truth, Stephen. It speaks to your life and your emotional truth. So let's talk about your reaction to those kinds of statements.
Yeah, so you know, the lead characters in all my books have been gay, and I think people say this to me as if it's, you know, a compliment, and it's always well-meaning, and you know, I'm never going to get angry at someone for that. I think what people are saying is, I've found you know, a greater humanity in them, and sometimes they're saying they're not filled with explicit sex, which can be, you know, a barrier for some straight readers perhaps to identify or you know, feel some camaraderie with the character. You know, I don't know, but I do consider them gay books. I hope every straight person reads them, but because of my you know, they're filled with my humor, my politics, my pop cultural references, the things that I find funny, my empathy. These are all things that I've developed because of my experience as a gay man, and so I do consider them, you know, sort of queer books in a way, but I don't want that to be off-putting to anyone. I think, you know, certainly I hope they're accessible to anyone who picks them up. I guess it's a similar thing. Like, do you have a reaction? You know, the terms women's fiction is such a loaded thing now, where if you write about family, if you're a woman writing female characters in books about family or stuff, you know, these should be universal. There's no reason why, you know, men shouldn't be rereading these stories, but often get classified as women's fiction. Have you experienced that with your books? Or
yeah, but I speak to a lot of female authors who have that. And I mean, somebody like Jodi Picoult, for goodness sake, she looks at all kinds of themes. She looks at everything. She'll look at racism, and she'll look at, at religion. She digs deep in terms of themes, and yet people will just say, oh, it's women's fiction, therefore it's kind of frivolous. And there's no such thing as just men's fiction, right?
Right.
Yeah, so
What's out the Norman Mailer? Oh, that's just men's fiction.
Well, it's mansplaining fiction. Maybe
Yeah.
we should start calling instruction manuals mansplaining fiction.
Yeah. Hear that, Philip Roth?
Yeah, no. So okay, so let's move on to the Guncle. So nobody here will have read it yet. Could you tell us what the Guncle is about? I love.
Hot off the press.
Wait, here's mine.
Oh, you have yours. Oh, wait, then I'm going to
this.
switch because I have yours here. This was your most recent book. And the yellow covers together.
They do look lovely.
Yeah, we're gonna have to have a yellow section on the shelf. Yeah.
Okay, tell us about the Guncle.
So the Guncle will be out in 10 days time on May 25th. And I have long had a fascination with sort of magical caregivers, Mary Poppins, a singing nun, a certain singing nun named Maria, and Auntie Mame, is a wonderful example. And I was fascinated both with the novel, and then it was a Broadway stage show with Rosalind Russell, and then a film with Rosalind Russell, and then a Broadway musical with Angela Lansbury, and then finally a movie musical with a very miscast Lucille Ball. It's still fun to watch though. But I've had this long fascination with this story, and Patrick Dennis, who was the novelist, was married and had kids, but was at the very least bisexual and lived a very closeted life, and it wasn't until towards the end of his life, and he died rather young, that he became active in the sort of Greenwich Village sort of queer scene in the late 60s and early 70s. But I got fascinated with the idea of that there were a number of closeted writers in the sort of mid-century, or even the ones who were openly gay, like Tennessee Williams or something, right, creating these really, truly phenomenally strong body, larger than life women, sometimes as stand-ins for gay men who they were not able to write openly about. Because of the time. So now that things have changed so much, I sort of wanted to revisit, this kind of story and maybe write it in a way that someone would have loved to have written 50 years ago, and wasn't able to. So if anyone doesn't know what a guncle is, we probably should have started with that. Yeah. It is sort of a slang now for a gay uncle, and culturally, guncles are having a moment. You can buy merchandise, world's best guncle. I've seen onesies for babies that say, my guncle loves me. There's even a Guncle's Day in August. I think it's the first or second Sunday in August. So, and I am the Guncle to 5 nieces and nephews between the ages of 6 and 12. Now, I hope I'm getting that right. This was drawn from personal experience a little bit, and they've all come to visit me in Palm Springs, California, where I live now. And I have a swimming pool, which is kind of magical when you're that age, and they sort of see me as this slightly other, this sort of mystical being, because they all live on the East Coast, that I'm the one relative who lives on the West Coast and have this life that they don't quite understand. I don't go to an office. I have a swimming pool. There are palm trees here. And it seemed like a fun backdrop to set a story.
Yeah. And so you had an experience with your brother and his children and his wife. And something was planned and it didn't work the way you planned it. And then that kind of led to the inspiration for this. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, a couple things. My brother and his wife and his 2 kids, who were my 2 nephews, who were 3 and 5 at the time, came to visit me for a week in Palm Springs here. And after 24 hours here, my brother, who's a very high-powered corporate attorney, was called back to be in court the next morning on the East Coast, and had to leave me with his two kids, and fortunately his wife stayed, and she was lovely and was obviously a big help. I wasn't with these two kids on my own, but their dad works a lot of hours. They were very excited to spend the week with him as much as they were with me. So I quickly had to sort of step in and become a little larger than life and entertaining to hopefully distract them. At the same time, I mentioned earlier, this is a book about grief. It is about the main character, Patrick O'Hara, is a once famous television actor who's sort of licking his wounds and retired to Palm Springs when he inherits his niece and nephew after a family tragedy. And his interactions with them and sort of unusual life lessons hopefully brings about a season of healing for all three of them. But as I sat down to write this, I did lose one of my best friends from college to breast cancer, and she left behind a 6-year-old son, which was devastating to think about grief in children. And when you're 6 years old, how much would you remember, a parent that you've lost, and how her friend community could maybe be there and fill in some of the gaps and let this boy know how much his mother loved him, as he grows. So there's a lot of sort of influences coming together at once, which is kind of the way life works.
Yeah, and I wrote, one of my books was heavily saturated by grief because I was grieving very much at that time as well. This is something, as writers, everything that's happening in our life goes into the book, rage, grief, whatever, it's there.
And often we're writing to figure it out, to work through it and to understand. Yeah. And hopefully it helps some readers find a kernel of truth that means something to them as well.
Absolutely. And I find that grief's one of the hardest emotions to work through because people think it has a beginning and an end. Mm-hmm. And there's a point at which it should stop. And it doesn't. Grief kind of saturates and permeates everything. But you brought such joy to this novel. It was just at moments laugh out loud, hilarious. And that for me was it's so true to life because, we can be going through the darkest times and somebody will make a joke, and it may be dark humor or whatever the case may be but it's just so cathartic and you can laugh through your misery so much. So let's talk about how you were able to balance those two, and also coming back to what we said earlier about how do you write a joke now that you want to kind of still be landing in 5 years' time?
Yeah, well, you hope novels have, it takes long enough to write a novel. You hope that it has a long shelf life and it's not just, so much of entertainment is front loaded now into opening weekend for a movie, or when it's drops on the day it drops on Netflix. And for books, it's, they get a short window of press and attention when they're first published. But you really hope a book particularly will be around for a long time. And in that sense, you don't want anything to feel ridiculously dated. And that was something fun about writing The Editor in the early 1990s. It was so easy not to have technology, not to have, there were no cell phones, there was no, internet, which, maybe existed, but it certainly wasn't in people's homes in the way that it is now. That stuff was a delight because you can then, as a writer, you can really focus on the human interaction. I don't know why they're punching each other, human interaction. And that helps something feel more timeless, I think. With humor, same sort of thing. I don't like to go for topical jokes, something about headlines or something that you would do in an opening monologue of The Tonight Show. I want humor and jokes that come deep from character, throwing characters in situations where maybe they don't belong and watching them sort of scramble and flail a little bit, and finding humor in that, but humor that comes from the interaction, that comes from character and situation more than coming from anything topical. And then also, with this, it was a balance. I don't know that I feel very grateful for the reviews, but I didn't know that I got the balance right. Sometimes I would think, God, this just reads as too funny, or these kids are in a tough spot in their lives. Am I writing them authentically? And So it is a challenge, certainly, particularly with children, because I don't have children, and I was always very conscious of that there's that is raising children is inarguably, yeah, that's a word, inarguably one of life's great emotional experiences, and to be a writer who writes about the human condition and not have that in your arsenal, this was a really interesting way for me to explore what I might be like with children, or what I had to say on the topic of raising children, even though I don't have them.
Yeah, but like gay Uncle Patrick Gup, he's floundering, and you can see that. Like he cares about these kids, and he's wanting, to do good by them, etc., etc. But you can see that he's kind of out of his depth. And sometimes the things he's doing to entertain them or to cheer them up aren't necessarily the most appropriate things. I loved the Gunkle rules. Could you tell us a bit about that as a device?
Well, sure. Like anybody who fashions themselves a little bit after an anti-meme, they're going to have a number of delicious bon mots, and for Patrick, he dispenses them as these Gonkel rules, these little life lessons that some are a bit ridiculous and designed to make the children laugh, but some hopefully have a kernel of truth, and maybe a truth that they wouldn't get from someone with a traditional upbringing. So those were very interesting to write, and something I had a lot of fun writing. Yeah.
The one that we showed in the video, it was what? Clothes have no gender.
Oh, gender. Yeah. So you see right on the cover, Patrick is fond of wearing caftans. As am I, to be perfectly honest. And in Palm Springs, it can be very hot, and you don't need a lot of clothing touching your skin. But and then taking that, and that, like, as kids are growing and figuring out who they are, and they're going through, I have a nephew who loves costumes and who loves animal costumes and wants to dress that way, and so sort of Patrick's and I have a niece who's a bit of a tomboy, and all that is fine with Patrick. I think his rule is, as long as you're comfortable and your clothes are not designed to have mean words on them or make fun of anybody else, and it's fine with him.
Yeah. And it was your first novel to really look at technology as well. So, Lily and the Octopus and the editor didn't really have technology, but in this, kids, one of the best ways to entertain kids is with videos and them watching, funny videos and funny snippets, etc. And you have some scenes with that.
Yeah, certainly it's the easiest way to distract a kid. But when a kid is grieving, you don't want to ignore them. So it's it's definitely a double-edged sword. You don't want to leave them to their own devices, as it were.
Literally.
Yeah, but the children come obsessed with YouTube. And I find this so fascinating that for me, the saddest day of my life, my mother loves to tell this story, is that it was when I found out that other children could see Mr. Rogers as well, that he wasn't just in this magical screen talking to me. But the power of television for Gen X, certainly, was being able to watch television it was such a thing. And I remember to this day the first, because we always had 3 channels, and I remember the day we got cable, and it came with this box that sat on top of the TV, and you had this clicker. You could click up, between 1 and 100 now, suddenly, instead of just 3. So it was attached to the television with this cord, and I took this little box off the top of the TV, put it on my lap, and the cord was long enough that it would reach the sofa, and I sat there and I would move as a kid, just moving the. And my mother came in and she was like, I have never seen anyone so lazy that they would not get up out of the chair to change the television channel. And so I had that.
It's called a remote control, Karen.
Yeah, exactly. But that was sort of like the first remote control. you know, for these kids, you know, and then I have nieces and nephews, and all they do, you know, I have a nephew who loved to watch for hours, would watch one clip of garbage trucks on YouTube after the other, and they would just sort of flow. One flows into the next after the next, and you have to be very careful about that sometimes, because sometimes it flows into something that's not quite as related as you want. But these kids are obsessed with YouTube and don't understand television. And Patrick, as a former television star, is like, what do you mean you don't like television? That's just not a language he can understand.
Yeah, it was brilliantly done. So tell us, okay, so before we get into all the questions, we've got 5 more minutes in which I ask questions. I can see the questions are coming in. Keep them coming in.
Oh, good.
Could you tell us, so you and Byron, who is now your husband, was then, you know, boyfriend, fiance, he proposed to you in the most literary way possible, and you replied in the most literary way possible. And this just melts my book-loving heart. Please tell us the story.
Yay. Well, Byron is a writer as well. His debut novel called A Star is Bored, his name is Byron Lane, came out last summer during the height of the pandemic. It was published last July. And in the acknowledgments to in his book, in the back of his book, he proposed, to me. And I had read this book, you know, through and through, different drafts, different, you know, when the advanced copies came in, you know, trying to help him and offer encouragement along the way. And I thought I knew every word in this book backwards and forwards, but he snuck in 4 extra words at the very end of the acknowledgments, which completely took me by surprise. And yeah, if you buy the Goggle, you can see my my response to his proposal in my acknowledgments. It's sort of the slowest epistolary novel or way to communicate in all time. But spoiler alert, it worked out.
And now you have the proposal and the acceptance, like you said, in the Library of Congress, right? What were you saying?
It's documented in the Library of Congress. Yeah, both the proposal and the acceptance. So
that is incredibly romantic. My husband proposed to me by elbowing me in the ribs at 5 a.m. on some random Tuesday, asking me if I wanted to marry him. So I'm like, you need to go and see the way Stephen and Byron did it, and then I want a do-over. Seriously, like most unromantic thing ever. Straight men are useless at this kind of thing. Before we go into the questions that everybody has, are you able to tell us, Stephen, what you are working on now? I know a lot of writers are very superstitious about telling us about what they're working on. What can you share with us about that?
Yeah, well, I am involved in both the movie adaptations. So Lily and the Octopus is sort of moving at a dachshund's pace, slow legs. This past year, COVID has really thrown a wrench for a lot of production and whatnot. But that is moving forward, and I'm very excited to be involved in that. I did not write the screenplay, but I am working in a producing capacity for that. The editor is also going to be a film of which I did write the screenplay. And so that is moving forward at its own pace as well. Sometimes these things happen quickly, and sometimes sometimes they take years. But I'm very excited for both of those.
There isn't a pandemic, so the pandemic certainly slows things down.
Exactly.
More.
But I love the idea of seeing Jackie O on the big screen, or she's sort of in her early 60s in this story, and I'm very excited about seeing an actress tackle that. We've never seen her on screen really outside of her days in the White House, and too many projects around the assassination and whatnot, when there was so much more to her as a woman. And I'm very excited about the idea of seeing this part of her life on screen, her professional life. So that's exciting. I had a new Audible original short story narrated by Neil Patrick Harris that came out over the pandemic, and I'm working on another book. I don't like to say what just yet, but I'm working. I sort of knew that as soon as vaccines came and we'd be able to rejoin the world, that it would be very difficult to keep my butt in a chair. So I've been trying to work, bank some time, but God, it is. I do not blame anyone who hasn't been productive this past year. All of us have been in sort of a low-grade depression. I think we're social creatures, and we're not meant to be so isolated, and it certainly has taken a toll. So we'll see. I'll go back and look at what I've written, and hopefully I'll still think there's something there, but trying to be forgiving of myself too if it needs another draft.
Yeah, the creative process is not best served by this kind of anxiety, etc. So we'll forgive you.
It's the anxiety part. The irony being that a lot of people have been living like writers this past year. Like working from home. Do I put on pants today? Should it be?
We were doing that long before it was popular.
Yeah, but long before it was popular. Yeah, everyone who thinks they've discovered soft pants, writers have known this for a long time. Should I have my fourth cup of coffee or first glass of wine? These are debates that happen
real
daily.
Writers' problems.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So.
Okay, so we've got a ton of questions. So let me go to them so that we can. Okay, so this is from Dorothy Lawson. Did you get a chance to meet or discuss your book with Caroline?
Kennedy, no, I didn't. I didn't, and it's tough because part of me would have loved to have sent her a copy, but there's no shortage of people who have wanted to trade on the Kennedy name and fame for their own, and I felt very awkward about that. And I didn't want to put any pressure on Caroline to read it. I would like to think that she would approve of this part of her mother, someone celebrating this part of her mother's life. When she died, JFK Jr. came out and made a statement and said, my mother was surrounded by her family and her books. And so if that doesn't tell you how important books and publishing were to her life, I don't know. And so I hope she would appreciate someone shining a light on the truly remarkable work that her mother did, even though she was a very private person. Carly Simon wrote the singer Carly Simon wrote a book about her relationship with Jackie in publishing, because Jackie edited 3 children's books that Carly wrote. And I know from my bookstore spies, Carly Simon bought a copy of the editor at a bookstore on Martha's Vineyard. And so I'm getting closer. Maybe one day it'll get to Carolyn.
Wonderful. So Nicholas has asked, how do you think you would have reacted if you were James and your editor was Jackie Kennedy?
I think I would have reacted very similar. That was not a scene that required a lot of research the first time Jackie walked in the room. Well, it required research to know what Jackie would say. But as far as James's reaction, I think there's nothing that can prepare you. There's nothing that really can prepare you for that. I think it's a mix of intimidation, awe, that this must somehow be a mistake, and that's certainly, I'm sure I would have felt all of those things.
And just to say, Stephen's editor, Sally Kim, is, okay, she wasn't married to one of the Kennedys, but certainly she's one of the most renowned editors working today, and so he is edited by the best of the best, because of course he is the best. So there's that as well. So Karen Clark has said James had a complicated relationship with his biological father. Is that also all autobiographical?
That is not. No, that was, I often get asked, how much do I plot out ahead of time? Am I a thorough outliner? Am I someone who flies by the seat of my pants? And I always write by what I call the headlight rule, which is I have a basic idea of the route that I'm taking, but I can't always see beyond where the headlights of a car would show you at night. So there's things just beyond my vision that I sometimes don't know are coming. And that was something that kind of surprised me as I wrote it, and then I was like, "Ooh, that's really interesting." So no, that is not autobiographical. I have a lovely father who, by the way, in retirement is a volunteer at his library, and so I come from a family of librarians as well, so we love libraries. He's a wonderful man.
Yeah, this is the thing with fiction, is that it's our jobs as writers to put as much conflict and tension in our books as possible. And it's our job to torture our characters as much as possible as well. So, we try and make everything possibly that could go wrong, bad relationships, etc. Because a happy kumbaya life makes for a good life, but it makes for bad fiction.
Yeah, so, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so we have Lauren Blackwood has said, Laughing and crying, you know it's the same release. People's Parties, Same Situation by Joni Mitchell. All right.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, for sure, for sure. Do you listen to music while you write? I'm always curious about this.
Me?
Yeah.
No, God, no. Music distracts me terribly. You?
Yeah. No, well, sometimes I can listen, but it can't have lyrics, even if lyrics as brilliant as Joni Mitchell. I can't. I just can't work that way. Yeah.
What I do is I have a playlist for every one of the books I'm writing. That I listen through the playlist because it gets me in the mood for, you know, certain parts of the scenes, etc. But when I write, everything needs to be quiet, except for my golden retriever barking incessantly in the background. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Janet Hadley has said, love Auntie Mame. So glad you updated it as it was so dated. Can you describe a Guncle episode with your nephews? Good question.
Of me personally?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let me think on that for a moment. But yeah, it was a horribly dated story, you know. And in fact, you know, when we think of the child in the original Auntie Mame story was named Patrick. It's where I took the name for the uncle. You know, I sort of get, and he's not intended to be the boy Patrick from Auntie Mame grown up. It is just an homage to use that name. But you know, Mame sent him off to boarding school or something. You know, when he's lost both of his parents, and very short attention is given to his grief. So yeah, hopefully that this is a more realistic update while also being no less fun. So I'm excited about that. There is a meme going around about Guncles who are happy to pose with their young nieces and nephews, and for Instagram or for photo, for content. And then there's a meme where afterwards they just throw the child into the pool. All right, I got my photo. I'm done with you. Yeah, for someone who's not, I'm not used to being a human jungle gym, which I sometimes am when I'm around the kids, and it's a lot to get used to. Let me try to think of a quick story as we move on to
I think I've seen some ones on your Instagram feed of all the flotation devices. This is what I love. So in the Guncle, the pool is just full of flotation devices, and it's big swans and it's unicorns.
Yeah, you can't even see the water. Yeah, you wouldn't even know it was a pool. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure I've seen pictures of your swimming pool with you with young kids in there.
Oh yeah.
It was the same kind of setup as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, let's have a look. There was so Janet as well has said, have you had any opportunities to speak to teens in schools? I think you would be such an inspiration to many budding authors.
Oh, thank you. I have, and I love doing it. I love speaking to students. You know, there are like Bianca, you know, teaching is absolutely something that can go hand in hand with you know, many writers are also teachers or professors of some kind. And I haven't formally taught, but man, I love talking to classrooms. One thing, you know, I grew up in Maine, which felt very far away, both from Hollywood, from the movie industry, but also from New York, from publishing. I grew up with a desire to write, but I thought that perhaps that was something you had to have a family name or come from money or live or be born in New York, or, you know, to have access to this industry. And so one thing that, you know, social media has its pluses and minuses, but I love that to be available to readers. I love students to be able to reach out and ask questions, any reader to reach out and ask questions, and to be available to, because I if anything, I want to show that, you know, anybody, you know, publishing is one of the great industries that is open to talent, and it doesn't matter where that talent comes from. And also, by the way, it's one of the least ageist industries, and that yes, there will always be a hot 25-year-old coming out of the Iowa Writers Workshop who makes a splash with something. But the biggest publishing phenomenon of this, you know, past 5 years certainly has been Where the Crawdads Sing, which was written by Delia Owens in her early, you know, published when she was in her early 70s as her first novel. So, and if that's not an inspiration to keep trying, you know, I didn't publish a book till I was 45. So, So absolutely, keep at it. I love talking to kids, but also one thing I say is, I have a couple novels that are on the shelf that hopefully will never see the light of day. But you have to write to learn how to write, and so that is always my biggest piece of advice. Like, don't get discouraged if the first one doesn't go. Sometimes you have to write 3 or 4, and it's the 5th one that really takes off.
Yeah, absolutely. There's that wonderful site called Humans of New York.
Love it.
Where he takes photographs and interviews New Yorkers. And there was a young boy. He looked, I don't know if he was like sort of 12 or 14, but he said he wanted to be a writer. And he was saying all kinds of things about writing that were just amazing. It was things that I had never thought of at the same age.
Wow.
And I was just like, this kid is going to be a writer. He was saying, you need conflict, you need these kinds of characters. And it was amazing how he was already framing a story. So that was amazing as well.
Yeah. The other thing I know we have to move on to the last question, but one other piece of advice I always give too is, if you have writing ambitions, tune into events like this. Seek out podcasts like Bianca's. Listen to other writers talk. I love library programming like this. I love bookstore programming. I love listening to other writers talk, and sometimes, there've been a few where I'm learning what not to do. And I don't mean that from a craft perspective. I mean that sometimes they're not very nice people, but most writers are incredibly nice and thoughtful and generous with their advice. And so listening to talks like this is why it's so important to have libraries in our communities doing programming like this. So thank you, Newport Beach Public Library. Okay, I think we have to, do we have time for one more?
We are actually done. We are done. There were some lovely comments. Janice said, not a question. Thank you for giving me the answer to how I get friends to read Lily. I've read it twice and laughed and cried both times, and also loved the editor. So that's always lovely to hear.
Oh, that's so great.
From our side, thank you so much for spending some time with us this evening. It's always wonderful to see all these literary people out there who love reading these books and who join us for the events. Don't forget that the Guncle is coming out soon. Support your independent bookstores. They've had a really, really rough year. So if you can pre-order the book and go out and get it from them, that'll be absolutely amazing.
And also library, people sometimes apologize to me for getting my book out of the library. No, libraries buy books too for their collection. And the reason that I am the writer I am today is because I had access to an excellent public school system, and I had a library card for my public library. And those two things hand in hand are why I'm here. I never apologize for getting a writer's book from the library. But yeah, maybe you want to buy it from an independent bookstore, they could use your support too.
So good evening, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your evening and have a lovely weekend. And Kunga, thank you so much for all of your help in setting this up. Stephen, always a delight to chat with you. I adored this book. I read it months ago. I'm buying it for everybody I know as gifts. So we wish you luck with its release.
Oh, thank you. I don't deserve you. Thank you for stepping in last minute. Bianca's 2 books are wonderful, wonderful as well. Hum If You Don't Know the Words, and I have to look. If you want to make God laugh, you are the queen of the 7-word book title.
Thank you, titles.
Yeah, I'm bad with. I'm just the.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening. Have a good weekend, Stephen.